In the vast expanse of the galaxy, peace had long prevailed, until a shadowy force emerged, consuming entire civilizations in its path. The Council, once united, found themselves powerless against the relentless tide. Hope seemed lost, until Earth unleashed a secret weapon that would forever alter the fate of the stars. The stars had witnessed countless wars, galactic empires rising and falling, civilizations clashing over dominion. Yet nothing could prepare them for what was coming. The Council had convened again, their faces etched with a mix of determination and fear. Around the vast council chamber, representatives from the unified species of the galaxy stood in uneasy silence. For centuries they had maintained peace, but now a growing threat loomed on the edge of their domain. A force with no origin, no name, simply known as the Shadows. They moved through space, consuming entire star systems, leaving nothing but darkness in their wake. The Council had tried everything: alliances, technological advancements, and strategies, but nothing had stopped the relentless advance of the Shadows. The room was filled with murmurs of doubt and frustration. The unity of the Council was crumbling under the weight of uncertainty. It seemed as though their shared history of peace was unraveling. Yet, deep in the hearts of those gathered, hope lingered, a fragile ember waiting for something miraculous. The whispers grew louder until one voice, calm yet resolute, broke through the silence. What do we have left to fight for if we abandon our resolve now? The speaker, a towering figure from Earth named Admiral Kalen, had always been a symbol of stubborn resilience. His words cut through the doubts like a knife. The Council turned to him, desperate for some glimmer of hope. Kalen had always stood apart, not out of arrogance, but from a deep-seated belief that humanity had something the others lacked. Not technology, not numbers, but a tenacity forged through centuries of struggle. He had witnessed humanity's history wars fought in the shadows of Earth, generations rising against impossible odds, always finding some way to endure. Now those lessons had become something far greater. The Council listened as Kalen continued, his voice steady, unwavering. We have fought before on Earth, on distant colonies, across a universe that sought to crush us, and we have always survived, because we refused to be consumed by the dark. His gaze swept over the gathered leaders. The Shadows are unlike anything we faced. They don't stop, they consume everything in their path, leaving nothing but silence. But what if that silence is a test? A test to see if we still have the will to fight. The room fell silent once more. The words echoed in the minds of the Council. Hope had begun to slip away, replaced by fear and doubt. Yet Kalen's speech had struck a chord deep within them, like an ancient signal from Earth itself, a reminder of resilience. The Council was made up of ancient beings, each with their own empires, their own histories of conquest and survival. Yet none of their experiences had prepared them for the Shadows. They had fought wars of ambition, of greed, but this was something entirely different. The Shadows weren't seeking power or dominance. They weren't even seeking existence, they simply were, consuming everything that crossed their path. It wasn't a war for territory, but for survival itself. We must stand together, Kalen said, his voice growing stronger. But standing together won't be enough. We need to fight together. Not with what we have, but with what we can become. The Council watched as he spoke, each word carrying the weight of humanity's past and their future. For many, the thought of survival was no longer about hope, but about survival itself. The Shadows had become a specter they could no longer ignore. The Council had seen countless threats in their lifetimes, but none had ever felt this inescapable. Yet deep within Kalen's speech, there was a flicker of defiance, a refusal to give in. His words weren't just a rallying cry, they were a reminder of humanity's enduring fight for existence. Kalen's belief was simple: survival was not given, it was taken. And if the Shadows sought to erase them, Earth would fight back with everything it had. As the Council exchanged glances, some still skeptical, others hanging on to the last remnants of hope, Kalen stood before them, his eyes unwavering. The fate of the galaxy was uncertain, but in that moment, one thing was clear: humanity would not be left behind. Days turned into weeks as the Council debated their next steps. Yet the Shadows were relentless, growing closer with each passing moment. Entire fleets were wiped out, entire worlds rendered lifeless. The galaxy trembled at the thought of these monstrous invaders. Some species whispered about abandoning their positions, fleeing to the outer rim, leaving the shadows to consume the core. Others sought sanctuary in alliances that were already fraying under the strain. Only Earth refused to yield. Admiral Kalen watched the reports coming from the front lines, his frustration mounting. The shadows were unlike anything encountered before. They didn't just destroy, they consumed everything, leaving no trace of life behind. No one knew their true nature, nor what fueled their endless march. The Council, once the bastion of hope, had become fractured. Trust was eroding. Fear took root and paranoia spread. Some argued that the shadows were more than mere invaders, they were a manifestation of the galaxy itself, a force birthed from ancient chaos. Others believed they were the product of some long-forgotten experiment, a weapon designed to eradicate entire civilizations. Regardless of origin, the shadows seemed unstoppable. Earth's warnings had fallen on deaf ears, dismissed as desperate pleas from a species no longer considered relevant in the grand tapestry of galactic power. The once proud council had become a hollow reflection of its former self. Still, Kalen remained unyielding. He knew the shadows were not just a threat to the galaxy, they were a threat to all sentient life. If they weren't stopped, there would be nothing left. Humanity had spent centuries preparing for survival. Earth had faced countless wars, endured catastrophe after catastrophe. Kalen had lived through it all. Generations before him had fought on their home planet, where survival had become a way of life. His people had built themselves back from the brink of extinction more times than they could count. He believed their resilience was a part of their DNA, a legacy written into their very essence. Humanity's history was one of defiance against overwhelming odds. The Terra Nova had been their final refuge, the last bastion of Earth's survival. The ship was vast, larger than anything the Council had ever seen. Its hull was not just reinforced by metal, but by centuries of human ingenuity and resolve. It carried not only Earth's soldiers, but the hope of a species that refused to be erased. Kalen watched the reports come in, each one more grim than the last. The shadows were closing in, their reach expanding far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Entire systems had already been consumed, wiped clean of all life. Kalen knew the odds were impossible. The shadows outnumbered their fleet exponentially. They were relentless, vast, and devoid of mercy. And yet, Kalen clung to a single thought: what if Earth had something no one else did? A weapon, a strategy, a will so fierce that even the shadows couldn't comprehend it. It wasn't arrogance or misplaced pride, it was a certainty rooted in Earth's history. Every generation that had survived on Earth had done so by defying the odds. They had never stood down from a fight, no matter how grim the situation. Kalen wasn't sure what they would face next. He didn't know if the shadows could be reasoned with, or if they had any kind of weakness to exploit. But he knew one thing: if there was any chance at survival, it would come from humanity. As the fleet regrouped, Kalen reached out to the other council leaders, pushing for a final, desperate stand. They might not be able to stop the shadows completely, but they could hold them long enough to find a way to survive. The cost would be high, and he knew many would fall. But in Kalen's mind, survival wasn't about numbers, it was about conviction. The shadows were approaching faster than anyone could track. The galaxy had never faced a threat like this. Yet, even in the face of overwhelming darkness, Kalen felt a stirring within him, a flicker of hope that refused to be extinguished. The battle wasn't over, and humanity had yet to show its true strength. The question wasn't whether they could win, it was whether they had the will to endure. Admiral Kalen stood on the deck of Earth's largest battleship, its hull glowing with the faint resonance of Earth's resolve. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for generations. Their world had endured wars, trials, and strife. But never had they faced a threat of such scale. From every corner of the galaxy they'd been watching, observing the shadows. The reports were cryptic, fragmented glimpses of shadowy entities that consumed entire systems. Humanity had spent years developing advanced technologies, but no one could predict what lay ahead. Kalen believed they held a weapon far greater than the galaxy suspected. In the darkest depths of Earth's history, They had always survived against the odds. It wasn't just about fighting now, it was about finding something within themselves that none of the other species had. Kalen knew Earth's secret wasn't a weapon of mass destruction, but something far more powerful: willpower. Humanity had faced extinction before Earth was a planet where survival was written into their very essence. The battle wasn't about numbers or advanced technologies. It was about something deeper, something that the shadows couldn't anticipate. The Terra Nova, humanity's last refuge, was more than just a vessel. It was a symbol of their will to survive. Its hull wasn't reinforced with metal alone, but with the memories of countless generations who had fought to stay alive. Every component, every weapon aboard that ship had been designed not just to defend, but to endure. It carried not just human soldiers, but the hope of a species that refused to be erased from existence. Admiral Kalen had studied Earth's history, its wars, and its defeats. He knew the stories of humanity's resilience. Generations of explorers, warriors, and thinkers had forged Earth's will through hardship. It wasn't just technology that made humanity formidable, it was their ability to adapt, to rise from ruin, and to never accept defeat. Kalen's thoughts were interrupted by reports flooding in from the front lines. The shadows had advanced beyond anyone's expectations. Entire fleets had been wiped out in the blink of an eye, and entire systems had vanished without a trace. They weren't simply attacking, they were consuming. Every report was worse than the last, filled with cries of despair from those who had barely escaped. The fear wasn't just about what the shadows could do, it was about what they had already done. Despite the despair, Kalen remained calm. He had seen humanity endure too much to be driven to panic now. He knew that desperation could become a weapon itself if wielded with the right conviction. The Terra Nova wasn't merely a ship, it was a reflection of humanity's unrelenting fight for existence. It carried the very essence of Earth itself, a species that had clawed its way back from the edge of extinction. Humanity wasn't just some relic of the past, forgotten by the galaxy. They were survivors. And Kalen believed they had found a weapon that no one else had. Reports had trickled through the council about a phenomenon, an energy field unlike anything they had ever encountered. Kalen knew of it. It was something hidden deep within Earth's most ancient archives, buried beneath layers of forgotten knowledge, a weapon capable of bending space and time. A weapon they called the Spear of Light. No one had dared to believe it still existed, let alone that it could be operational. But Kalen had studied Earth's history closely. He knew there were technologies from humanity's past that had been thought lost. Civilizations long vanished had achieved things no one else could comprehend. It wasn't arrogance, it was survival. Humanity's ability to adapt and endure had always been their greatest weapon. They had pushed beyond the boundaries of what others considered possible. The shadows were vast, terrifying, and seemingly unstoppable. But Kalen believed they had a weapon far greater than simple firepower. They had hope, something that the shadows could never understand or destroy. If there was any chance of survival, Kalen knew it wasn't through brute force or overwhelming firepower, it was through their unrelenting will to endure. The shadows had conquered entire civilizations, but they hadn't faced humanity. They hadn't faced the species that had always refused to surrender. As Kalen stared out into the void, he knew that whatever came next, humanity would fight. And they would fight with the one thing the shadows could never erase: their will to survive. The moment arrived. The fleet gathered the council forces and humanity's own. They formed a desperate front line against the encroaching tide of shadows. The battleground stretched beyond the stars, a void where fear and courage clashed. The shadows came without warning, emerging from the void like a tide of darkness. They didn't speak, didn't seem to have a purpose beyond destruction. Their ships were grotesque, monolithic, incomprehensible forms of corrupted matter. The first wave of shadows descended upon the fleet, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. Alliance forces faltered, retreating under the relentless assault. It wasn't fear that drove them back, it was the hopeless realization that nothing could withstand such overwhelming darkness. The shadows moved like a tide of pure chaos, consuming all in their path. There was no communication, no strategy, they moved as one, a single entity driven by some unknown, primal instinct. The fleet commanders watched in horror as entire formations were obliterated, their fleets torn apart in moments. Kalen watched the reports flood in, his fists tightening as he saw familiar systems vanish from the star maps. The shadows were consuming everything, and no one had answers. Kalen knew the cost of this battle would be high. The shadows didn't seem to have any weaknesses. They were relentless, unstoppable, devouring entire star systems as though they were nothing more than dust. Alliance forces crumbled under the weight of their advance. It became clear to Kalen that even their combined forces couldn't withstand the shadows for long. The only option was to hold them off, to buy time for humanity to strike back. Kalen turned to the Terra Nova's crew, his voice steady. "We may not be able to win this fight in the traditional sense, but we can't lose either. We hold the line. We protect what we can, and we fight to the last breath if necessary." The crew nodded silently, their expressions a mixture of fear and resolve. They knew what was at stake, but there was no choice. The shadows continued their advance, sweeping through the remaining council fleets with relentless precision. No one knew how they operated. No signal, no command structure, just an endless tide of destruction. Kalen's heart pounded in his chest as he realized there was no time to wait. The shadows wouldn't give them a chance to regroup, and the galaxy was falling apart around them. The council forces were falling back, but Kalen knew retreat wasn't an option. Earth had always survived by defying the odds, and now more than ever, they would have to do so again. Then, a transmission crackled through the void. A message from Earth. It wasn't just another desperate call for help, it was something different. It carried a sense of urgency and purpose that none of the other council leaders had expected. The message was simple yet profound. "We fight." Kalen's pulse quickened as he received the transmission. Earth wasn't asking for permission, they were declaring their intent. The shadows had ignored humanity's existence for too long, dismissing them as insignificant. But Earth had endured through countless crises. They had built something far greater than any other species could fathom: willpower. The shadows had consumed vast empires, wiped out entire fleets without hesitation, but Kalen knew they hadn't faced humanity's resolve. "We fight," Kalen whispered to himself. He replayed the transmission, the simple yet unwavering message echoing through his mind. There was no retreat. Humanity had something the shadows lacked: a reason to endure, to fight not for survival, but for existence itself. The battle raged on, the shadows growing closer, their monstrous forms looming larger with each passing moment. But Kalen didn't look at them with fear. Instead, he focused on the determination of his crew, on the strength of humanity's spirit. He knew the shadows couldn't comprehend that strength. The shadows would soon discover that humanity wasn't one they could consume so easily. If they would be destroyed, it would not be without a fight. As the shadows drew nearer, the tension aboard the Terra Nova reached a fever pitch. The massive battleship, bristling with weapons and designed to endure, stood as humanity's last line of defense. The crew moved with a quiet urgency, their steps deliberate and their expressions hollow. They had trained for this moment, but nothing could have prepared them for the overwhelming presence of the shadows. Kalen stood on the command deck, his eyes scanning the horizon. The fleet around them had fractured, retreating in disarray. Alliances once held together by trust were now dissolving into chaos. The once proud council was fractured, their unity replaced by fear and despair. Earth was their only hope, but even that hope felt fragile. Kalen knew the shadows weren't just an external threat, they were a force that struck at the very core of existence. The more they fought, the more they realized that their enemies were not merely invaders, but something more profound, something alien to the very fabric of reality itself. The shadows didn't follow rules or logic. They didn't care for boundaries or treaties. They were chaos made manifest, a cosmic entity devoid of reason. The council had never faced such a foe. Not since the dawn of civilization had there been a force so indifferent to the very concept of life. Humanity had always endured by defying the odds, but even Kalen wasn't sure they could outlast the shadows. His thoughts were interrupted by a report from one of his officers. "Admiral, they're closing in. The shadows are almost upon us." The officer's voice trembled with fear, but Kalen's gaze remained steady. "Hold the line," Kalen ordered, his voice calm but firm. "We fought harder battles, and we've survived." He clenched his fists, his mind racing. He remembered the ancient records of humanity's past, their survival through plagues, wars, and near extinction. Every generation of Earth had endured impossible odds, and they always found a way to endure. "We are not defeated," Kalen said, his voice rising above the commotion. "We are survivors. We are humanity." His words echoed through the command deck, galvanizing the crew. They had come too far, lost too much, to give in now. Kalen had spent countless hours studying Earth's history, reading about humanity's countless near demises. But what stood out most was their capacity to adapt, to transform even the bleakest moments into opportunities to rise again. "They may have destroyed entire civilizations," Kalen continued, his voice unwavering, "but they've never faced what's inside us. We don't break easily." The crew drew strength from his words, their fear replaced by a fierce determination. They understood that their survival wasn't just about technology or weapons, it was about something deeper, something no one had accounted for. The shadows didn't just want to consume, they wanted to erase everything. They weren't conquerors, they were oblivion itself. And if humanity was to survive, they would need to awaken a power beyond anything the shadows could understand. Kalen wasn't sure what that power was, but he knew it had to lie within the remnants of Earth's history. He remembered the ancient myths, the ones they had dismissed as mere legends. The stories of a weapon, a force that could bend the very fabric of reality. A weapon they had called the Spear of Light. If such a weapon truly existed, Kalen knew they had no choice but to seek it. The shadows were relentless, but Kalen believed they had overlooked something fundamental about humanity. Earth's survival wasn't based on brute force alone, it was rooted in their ability to endure, to rise, to never give in. The battle was far from over, and the cost would be high. But Kalen wasn't about to let humanity be consumed. Not without a fight. The command deck shook as weapons fired, as the shadows' endless advance continued. But Kalen knew they had something the shadows would never understand: the will to survive. The battle against the shadows raged on, their relentless advance consuming everything in their path. The Terra Nova and the remnants of humanity's fleet stood as the last bastions of hope. The skies around them were darkened by the encroaching tide of shadows, vast, monstrous vessels that flickered between dimensions, leaving nothing but emptiness in their wake. Colin stood at the command center, his gaze fixed on the viewscreen. The shadows were vast and monstrous, their ships barely recognizable as vessels of war. They didn't operate like traditional enemies, they were an abyss of void and hunger, stretching beyond the known reaches of the galaxy. The reports continued flooding in, the remnants of the Council's fleets lost without hope. The few who had managed to escape spoke of annihilation, of entire civilizations reduced to nothing. The shadows had no armies, no tactical mind, it was as if they existed only to erase. It wasn't a war of conquest, but of obliteration. Humanity had always fought for survival. But the shadows didn't understand survival, they only understood extinction. Colin clenched his fists as the screen flickered again, showing fleets falling, entire star systems disappearing into nothingness. The shadows didn't just destroy, they erased. The fleets they had once relied on were gone. The Council's allies were either scattered or lost. Only Earth remained. The Terra Nova was their last hope, but even Kalen knew it might not be enough. The shadows weren't driven by tactics or strategy. They didn't seem interested in victory or defeat, they were a force of pure annihilation. Yet, Kalen couldn't afford to let despair take hold. There had to be something more, something that could shift the balance in their favor. Humanity's history had always been filled with legends of lost technologies, of ancient weapons that could reshape reality. One such legend was the Spear of Light. It was a weapon of myth, a force said to have the power to disrupt the very fabric of existence, capable of piercing the void itself. Colin had spent endless hours poring over Earth's ancient archives, searching for any trace of it. If the shadows were as unstoppable as they seemed, he had no choice but to believe in the possibility of such a weapon. It wasn't just hope, it was necessity. But finding the Spear of Light wasn't the only challenge. The galaxy had changed over eons. Ancient civilizations had disappeared, their knowledge lost to time. Colin didn't even know if the weapon was real, if it still existed, or if it could even be activated. Still, He couldn't afford to think otherwise. The shadows had consumed everything in their path, what was left but to fight. The Terra Nova's crew worked tirelessly, gathering every bit of data from Earth's ancient archives. They weren't just fighting to hold their ground, they were searching for a solution that could end the shadows once and for all. Kalen could feel the weight of their efforts. The last traces of hope, fragile as they were, rested on the belief that Earth's history contained some key to survival. Every crew member, every soldier, every pilot knew they might be sacrificing themselves for a chance that might never come. But they had no other option. The shadows didn't care for mercy, and they certainly didn't understand the concept of surrender. Colin stared at the looming void on the view screen, watching the shadows approach relentlessly. They were growing bolder, closer. The question wasn't if they would destroy humanity, it was when. And yet Colin couldn't accept defeat. The Spear of Light might have been a myth, but it was all they had. If Earth's legends were true, it would be their final weapon, a chance to disrupt the shadows at their very core. The battle wasn't just one of strategy or firepower, it was one of belief, of hope. Colin knew that without the Spear of Light, humanity's existence could very well come to an end. But even in the face of annihilation, he clung to that fragile hope. If Earth had survived countless crises before, if they had endured extinction in the past, then there had to be a way to survive this. The shadows were relentless, but Colin knew one thing for certain: humanity's will to survive was stronger. It was time to uncover the truth, to awaken what had long been hidden in the depths of Earth's history. If they were to fall, they would fall fighting. They would not be consumed without a battle. Kalen stood on the command deck, his eyes locked on the screen that displayed the advancing shadows. They loomed closer, monstrous and silent, their presence like a void consuming everything in their path. The Terra Nova was humanity's last stand, their final hope against the relentless tide of oblivion. The crew had pushed their limits, poring over every fragment of Earth's forgotten history, searching for the Spear of Light. The archives had hinted at its existence, but the details were sparse and cryptic. Even Kalen wasn't sure if it was real, but what other choice did they have? If the shadows could be defeated, it had to be by some ancient, forgotten technology, some force that no one else had dared to tap into. He could feel the weight of their mission, the burden of leading humanity when hope was growing thin. The Terra Nova trembled beneath him as another wave of the shadows passed through space. The fleet had long since broken apart, scattered across the galaxy, each faction struggling to survive on their own. The Council was no more. Only Earth remained, and the shadows were now just hours away. "We fight, no matter the cost," Kalen whispered to himself, gripping the edge of the command center as though the ship's very presence gave him strength. The crew worked feverishly, their hands guided by instinct and desperation. If the Spear of Light existed, it had to be found. Time was running out. Kalen's mind kept returning to the stories, the ancient myths that had been dismissed by the rest of the galaxy. The Spear of Light, if it truly existed, wasn't just a weapon, it was a force that bent reality itself. The shadows didn't operate by logic or reason. They were a force of pure annihilation, a void consuming everything they touched. If the Spear of Light was real, it could disrupt that void. It could create a ripple that the shadows wouldn't be able to absorb, something they couldn't comprehend. Colin knew that whatever they found would come too late for some, but not for all. If they could disrupt the shadows' advance, even for a moment, they might gain enough time to mount a defense or perhaps escape into some hidden corner of the galaxy. It wasn't about winning a war, it was about survival. "Every second counts," Colin said, turning toward the crew. "Find the Spear of Light. We must awaken it before they reach us." The crew didn't question his command. They were determined, driven by a hope that felt increasingly fragile. The archives contained fragments, shadows of forgotten knowledge, but none of it had been verified. Yet, Kalen couldn't let go of that glimmer of possibility. The Spear of Light had been dismissed by many as myth, but Kalen knew myths often carried fragments of truth. Humanity had always survived by finding ways others had overlooked, by holding on to hope even when all seemed lost. As the shadows closed in, Kalen felt a shift deep within him. It wasn't fear, he had already accepted the possibility of his own destruction. It was something else, something quiet and persistent. Hope. If they were to fall, it wouldn't be without a fight. If the Spear of Light existed, it would be their salvation. The Terra Nova would not be consumed without resistance. The crew's efforts became more frantic as they searched deeper into the archives. They pieced together fragments of ancient knowledge, translating them into actions. Time was running short, but Kalen refused to believe it was too late. "Admiral," a crew member called out, interrupting his thoughts. "We found something. A fragment. A clue." Kalen rushed to the crew member, his heart racing. The fragment was incomplete, barely legible, but it was enough to suggest they were on the right path. "What does it say?" Kalen demanded, his voice sharper than before. The crew member pointed to the faded text. "To awaken the spear, one must reach beyond. Beyond the stars, beyond the void, beyond even hope." Colin stared at the words, feeling a chill run down his spine. Beyond the void. Was it speaking of the shadows? Was there something in the far reaches of space that could counter them? The crew member continued, reading aloud, "A key lies in the echoes of ancient chaos. Only those who seek will find." Kalen's mind raced. Ancient chaos, what did it mean? Was it connected to the shadows? Was there some fragment of their own past, some long-forgotten truth, that could hold the key? "Find it," Kalen ordered. "Whatever it takes, we need to understand these words." The Terra Nova's engines hummed, the ship vibrating beneath them as it surged forward. The shadows were closing in, the void swallowing entire star systems. But Kalen had glimpsed something beyond the fear, something that filled him with a quiet, burning resolve. If humanity was to survive, it would come from a place they had long forgotten. The spear of light wasn't just a weapon, it was a force that could unravel the very fabric of the shadows. The crew continued their search, but Kellen knew the time for answers was dwindling. The shadows wouldn't stop until they had consumed everything, and so, with the last remnants of hope clinging to the edge of despair, Cullen resolved that they would fight. They would not be swallowed by the void without a battle. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Horizons Stories for more thrilling tales of humanity's courage, ingenuity, and triumph in the face of the unknown. Stay tuned for your next adventure among the stars.